All right, we're about to tackle a massive subject. We're diving into what was, without a doubt, the largest and most brutal conflict in all of human history, the Eastern Front of World War II. I want you to just look at this number for a second. 27 million. It's almost impossible to really wrap your head around it. That's the estimated number of Soviet losses alone. And get this, 2/3 of them were civilians. This single number really sets the stage for the just mind-boggling scale of horror we're about to unpack.
So that number, it really begs the question, right? The Eastern Front wasn't just another battlefield. It was something else entirely. So why? What was it that made this one single theater of war so uniquely catastrophic? Well, let's break it down.
Here's how we're going to tackle it. First, we'll try to grasp the scale. Then we'll dig into the ideology that fueled all the brutality. After that, we'll see how total war just erased all the rules. Look at the horrific cost for civilians, analyze the war of resources, and then, finally, we'll bring it all together to understand the front's brutal legacy. Okay, first up, let's try to properly frame this conflict and its completely unprecedented scale. It all kicks off on June 22nd, 1941. Nazi Germany launches Operation Barbarossa. We're talking about the largest land campaign ever, stretching all the way from the Arctic down to the Caucasus. Now, with a scale like that, you know the casualties are going to be immense. But here's the thing. The final death toll wasn't just a product of military clashes. No, it was the result of a deliberate, ideological plan. And that right there, that brings us to the absolute core of why this front was so violent. A truly terrifying ideology. To really get the Eastern Front, you have to understand this one German word, Vernichtungskrieg. It means a war of annihilation. See, for the Nazis, this wasn't a normal war between nations. It was a racial crusade against what they called Judeo-Bolshevism. And this toxic worldview completely transformed military strategy into a campaign of outright genocide. And this wasn't just some abstract idea, okay? It was written down, codified into official policy. You had the infamous Commissar Order, which demanded the on-the-spot execution of Soviet political officers. You had regular army units collaborating with the SS death squads, the Einsatzgruppen, in mass murder. And official decrees gave soldiers a free pass to carry out collective punishments on entire villages. Ideology became policy, and policy became atrocity. And if you think it couldn't get worse, it does. This genocidal thinking even infected economic policy. The Hunger Plan was a cold, calculated strategy to seize all the food from places like Ukraine to feed the German army and its people back home. The known, accepted, and even desired consequence was the deliberate starvation of up to 30 million Slavic people. It was literally weaponized starvation. So when you have an ideology of annihilation like that, what happens next is almost inevitable. You get a state of total war, a state where that line between a soldier and a civilian gets completely erased. Now, both sides adopted a total war footing, but they did it in different ways. Germany at first was focused on pure extermination, but as the war started to drag on and turn against them, they pivoted to exploiting civilian labor. The Soviet Union, on the other hand, was fighting for its literal survival, so it mobilized everything and everyone. This included folding its massive gulag system into the war effort, where, as you can imagine, mortality rates for forced laborers just skyrocketed from famine and brutal conditions. For both sides, human life just became another resource to be burned by the war machine. Okay, so we've talked about policy and strategy, but what did this state of total war actually mean for ordinary people? Let's look at the absolutely devastating impact on civilians. Just let this number sink in for a second. 3.3 million. Of the 5.7 million Soviet soldiers captured by the Germans, 3.3 million of them died. They weren't killed in action. They were deliberately starved, frozen, and worked to death in captivity. This was a direct policy of annihilation in action. For those living under German occupation, life was a living nightmare. The policies were specifically designed to terrorize and destroy. Entire villages were burned to the ground in so-called anti-partisan operations, which were often just a thin excuse for mass murder. Young people were rounded up and shipped to Germany as slave laborers. And of course, woven through all of this was the systematic eradication of Jewish communities, the Holocaust. And you know, the suffering was not limited to one side of the front lines. The Soviet state, making its own brutal calculations, deported nearly 2 million of its own citizens from ethnic groups they decided were untrustworthy. And as the Red Army liberated areas, they imposed incredibly harsh conscription policies, forcing even kids and old men into labor, which led to widespread exhaustion and disease. Beyond all the human horror, this was also a brutal math problem, a war of tanks, planes, and supply lines. And this clash of industrial might is what ultimately decided the outcome. Germany's famous blitzkrieg was devastating at first, but it had a fatal flaw. It couldn't be sustained. As their armies pushed deeper and deeper into the vastness of Russia, their supply lines stretched to the breaking point. This was made even worse by the Soviets' own scorched earth policy, destroying anything and everything of value as they retreated, and a relentless partisan war that was constantly sabotaging German logistics.
The Soviet response, on the other hand, was just incredible. In a feat that's hard to even imagine, they dismantled and moved over 2,500 factories east, beyond the reach of German bombers. Their centrally planned economy poured a staggering 76% of the entire national income directly into the war effort. And with so many men fighting at the front, it was women and the elderly who stepped into the factories, becoming the absolute backbone of Soviet production. It was nothing less than a total societal mobilization for survival. And of course, we can't tell this story without talking about the huge role of Allied support. The Lend-Lease program was a lifeline. You can see here it provided a quarter of the Soviet Union's aircraft and a fifth of its tanks. Now, this aid didn't single-handedly win the war for the Soviets, but it filled critical gaps at the most crucial moments, helping their industrial machine outpace Germany's. So let's bring it all together. What is it that makes the Eastern Front the single deadliest theater in the entire history of warfare? Well, it was a uniquely deadly combination of factors. It was a perfect storm. You start with a genocidal ideology that completely strips the enemy of their humanity. That, in turn, justifies total war tactics that blur the line between soldier and civilian, which then leads to mass murder on a scale never seen before. And underpinning all of it was this titanic struggle between two industrial giants, where victory came down to who could outproduce and outsupply the other across an entire continent. And that's what we're left with, isn't it? A final chilling question to think about. The Eastern Front is really a monument to humanity's darkest capabilities. It shows us exactly what happens when a destructive ideology gets the keys to a modern, industrialized state, one that's capable of waging war on a total annihilating scale. It's a lesson from history that we can never, ever afford to forget.